Hey there. Life is busy, isn't it? And there always seems to be more to do than time to do it. Do you ever struggle to rest effectively, to refill and refuel? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. How to rest effectively, to refill and refuel when life is busy. Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. Scripture tells us in Psalm 62, 1-2, my soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken. Today, we're going to be talking about resting and refueling. And my favorite way to do that is at the lakeside. So we're going to be talking to my friend Marci Siether, author of Lakeside Retreat. Marci's writing career began after her humor article was published in a small town newspaper over 20 years ago. Since then, she's authored 2 books and hundreds of articles for local papers, including Guidepost, Focus on the Family, and Clubhouse Magazine. Her biggest joy, besides being married to John for 37 years and raising 6 kiddos, is spending time with her grandkids in the kitchen. Marci, you and I got to know each other like about a decade ago.
No.
It's been a long time, but it's been fun to watch each other's journey and kind of learn from each other. And I have to say, I'm absolutely in love with Lakeside Retreat. This is right up my alley. And after I went through it, it now sits on the ottoman in the living room of our lake house for other people to pick it up and see it. So I'm just so glad that you joined us today. Welcome to Your Hope-Filled Perspective.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that it is found itself place on a lake, because I think most people have been either to a lake or to a river or a stream or camping. If they haven't, they can enjoy it vicariously through this. But even if you don't have a lake house, chances are you've been to a lake and you've imagined what that would be like to just sit in the hammock and let it sway. And so I'm so glad, though, it's at the lakeside at your house. And
I love it. It's the perfect devotions for being at the lake. And I don't know about you, I'd be curious to hear, but for me, there is something so soothing about the water. Like I can be in a really bad mood, let's just put it that way. And then I go out on the water and within seconds, I'm like, oh, life is good. I mean, it's almost supernatural crazy, the difference that just being on or around water does for me. Does that do that for you?
Yeah, and I think being at a lake or being on a stream or camping, like our family always went camping and stuff. And there is something that I think it's because there is the fingerprints of God all around you. And you can really, it just kind of feeds all of your senses, the smells of the trees, the smells of a campfire, the sound of water lapping against the shore, I love the sound of boats and people laughing as they're being pulled in an inner tube, and just remembering those times when we actually did go on real inner tube rides.
Right.
If you're old enough and you remember those black tubes with and you had to make sure that the air tube wasn't poking up
down.
Yeah, because otherwise you'd poke your eyeball out, and you'd have to make sure you turned it over because it was about 500 degrees if it had been sitting in the sun. So
Right.
yeah, those fun things that I think we were able to recall and remember. And usually those are positive times in our life, because it was a time of reconnecting with people that we love. It was time to have just solitude for ourselves. And it was a time to just observe and appreciate God's fingerprints. So I think the lake is special.
It really is. Just recently, we had time to spend time on a different lake than our lake, on a boat with my oldest son and someone special in his life. And it was just such a relaxing time and a good chance just to kind of get to know each other a little bit better. It was great. But, I know that even for us to go out on the lake it's a matter of I've got to decide to put the to-do list down because life is busy for everyone, and often with more time, with more things to do than we have time to do them. So how did you come to recognize and realize the need for rest?
So that's a great question. And also I want to add that most of the photos in the book are mine as well. So that was fun too, is
Yeah.
to even the cover photo is mine, the inside photos. And so I love being able to capture those moments at the lake that sometimes we pass by. And I think sometimes we pass by because we are in such a rush.
Yeah.
We have so much to do. And I remember when our kids were really young and my husband we were going to go to a family camp and we're packing, and I was just stressed out over this relaxing time. And he told me, because I had grown up camping, he's like, honey, I thought you really enjoyed camping growing up. And I told him, yes, it's because my mom packed.
Right.
So when I realized too, and I talked to the kids, and I had all their clothes out, which were dirty within 30 seconds of getting to the campsite. And I said, they kind of look like little shake and bakes by the time they're done, because they're just covered in dirt and everything. And I just realized, you know what? Sometimes you just have to let that go. So I just would say, okay, pack a bathing suit, an extra pair of shorts, a sweatshirt, and something clean to wear home. And then also the meals, I used to make such a big deal of all the meals. It's like, and our kids even said, Mom, we don't really love having to wait at the campsite for this huge campfire breakfast. We just want a bowl of cereal so that we can go down and go fishing and water skiing before the lake gets rocky. So I realized I was putting more on myself than I needed to. And I think that actually carries over to life. How many times do we add more, than what needs to be added? It's not just enough. And sometimes by dialing it back, we are not doing less. We actually are creating space for breathing and enjoying those moments. So yeah, I've learned a lot just by getting packed, just by going, just by letting go of that to-do list it's always going to be there for you.
Well,
But
especially as moms, I think, we really want things to be perfect.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think your kids saying, Mom, we just want cereal. Like
Yeah.
they're not expecting perfect. So maybe we can take that expectation off our shoulders and enjoy them down by the water faster.
Yeah.
How do you make time to rest when life is so busy? Like you've been on a book tour, you've been traveling the country, crazy busy. I know you're constantly doing stuff for writing and ministry. So how do you make that time?
First of all, this is day 22 of a 30-day journey. At the end of this, John is going to drop me off in Independence, Kansas, and I will be doing drone work and photography for another author, and she's flying me home. So talk about adding as much as we can. And I brought my canning stuff. I made nectarine jam with our granddaughter while we were on the trip, and we've driven from Tennessee all the way to California, and now we're going to be going back starting tomorrow morning. I think part of it is pacing. And we have actually, my husband and I have talked about this as far as we're not so exhausted because we have paced it well. And instead of thinking of all the people we need to see, it was, we're going to be here and we would love to see you and connect with you here. And then if there's chances that we have little pockets of time, we might be able to do those things. But we would do a day of travel and a day of rest. And we weren't doing back to back. And so taking that rest in between, I mean, it was so hot here yesterday, but it was nice to go up and spend time with my parents at my childhood home. But just having that, like just doing that, not trying to cram a bunch of other things in, and just having some time to rest in between, I think made the journey sustainable. It's kind of like the difference between running a sprint or running a marathon.
Yeah.
They don't start at the same pace. The marathon runner is pacing themselves, thinking of the end. What kind of, and then usually they have enough reserve, they can kick it to the end. They can kick it into gear. And I think sometimes, especially as women, we feel like we are sprint running for the marathon race. We don't pace ourselves. And then we wonder why we are exhausted and we have burnout. We're not even to the 5 mile marker before we have depleted all of our energies. And so I just think that pacing for me on this trip, and then like I had mentioned before, when we get home, I still have some events, but I do want to take a week where I don't do anything on my to-do list, because we always have a list. We always have this running list. I'm a list maker. I make lists for my lists.
Yep.
And I just think it's important to plan ahead so that we can pace that out. But yeah.
I know that we've got men and women who listen to the podcast who
Mhm.
are so busy, careers and family and all the family extracurricular. And to many people, and if I'm being honest, for myself up until, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, the idea of rest, aside from sleeping, was a foreign concept. So talk for a
Mhm.
minute about, how do you know what is the best way to rest and refuel?
So first of all, we have 6 kids. So that's resting. I mean, I definitely, that is something that's key. We have 6 kids, we have 6 grandkids, and we moved to Tennessee a year and a half ago. And when we did, that was the first time in 34 years we had not had children in the home. So for over 30 decades, or for 3 decades, we had kids. That's hard.
Yeah.
But it was kind of because of working on this project and thinking about, the theme kind of is rest. And really, it was a good time because we had just moved and everything was crazy. I didn't really realize how much rest I needed. And just to feel myself just relax and actually feel myself breathe. I just remember lying down on the soft quilt in the bedroom next to that was at the lake cabin, and just doing nothing, just resting. And it was kind of interesting. Last Easter, I had gone on a trip with my mom and my sister, and we went to a church that had handbells for their Easter service. And I saw everybody with their matching vests, and I thought, oh, kind of like big girl brownies, like they were all dressed up. And then they started playing the handbells, and as they would play the handbell, and if you're a musician, the rests is when you don't play. You don't sing, you don't play the trumpet, whatever it is that you're playing. But for handbells, the music is always going. Once it starts to go, it continues. And so they would purposefully shoulder those handbells. After, maybe it was for 2 beats, and then they would have to shoulder it for it to be rested. And I asked my friend who did handbells, I'm like, what is it called if they don't do that? Because then you would just have this crazy amount of sound going on. And she said, if you don't fully rest the bells, it's called bleeding. I'm like, wow. Note to self.
Yeah.
When we don't come to a complete rest, it's bleeding. And how many times are we bleeding out emotionally, mentally, physically, because we have not, and the handbell doesn't stop itself. The handbell ringer is the one who has to purposefully rest that bell to their shoulder. So I just thought, that's such a great thing, that you are not adding anything. You're not a benefit to the music when you do not honor the rest.
That's so good.
So that was just so profound for me.
Well, I think it's so interesting because scripture shows us Jesus had a really busy ministry. Jesus had to fit all of his primary ministry into 3 years. And yet he did take time to rest. There were always more people, but he still took time to rest. Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, but I want you to stick with us, because when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Marci about how to rest effectively, to refill and refuel when life is busy. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective, where today we are talking with author and my friend Marci Siether. She's the author of Lakeside Retreat, Life-Giving Devotions from a Restful Shore. Marci, before the break, we were talking about how to rest and refuel. And you were talking about the idea that in music with the handbells, if you don't take that full rest, it's called bleeding. And I think our life is like that the more we go, the less quality we're going to end up having in the long term.
Mhm.
So I want you to talk about, why do you think we reserve the term R&R, rest and relaxation, for vacations? What about in our daily life?
I think we feel guilty if we're resting.
Yeah.
If we're not productive, then we're not doing something. And I think this is for myself. So I can't speak for everybody because I'm sure everybody does this better than myself. But sometimes rest feels like something to check off on Sunday afternoon.
Mhm.
Like, okay, I've been here and now have I rested? Check. And it is part of the list. It's part of something that you do as a check off.
Yeah.
It's not something that you do as far as breathing or thoughtful meditation, just having your quiet time. Even quiet time can be a check off item on your list.
Yeah.
Did I do my check off? Did I do my, did I swim my laps? Whatever it is. And so I think that we have reserved it for vacation because we don't see the value of it in our everyday lives. But rest is something that, like you said, it says, be still and know that I am God.
Yeah.
What is it about being still? Like, why can't we be busy and know that he is God? Why can't we be going? And I just think sometimes we are going so fast that we don't rest enough to hear the whispers of God. And I think back to when we lived in Minnesota. We were just in Minnesota, and there's so much water in Minnesota. There's so many sloughs and stuff. And when we first moved to Minnesota, I was amazed at all the birds. There was, because of all the water, there was more birds than I had ever seen. And I just loved listening to them. And one day I was driving probably 60 miles an hour, and I saw all the birds next to the road, like in the sloughs. And I realized they're making all of these beautiful sounds, but I am going so fast, I can't identify any of them. If I had slowed, I could have heard all of them. I think sometimes in our life, we are going so fast, and they could say, oh, there's a bird. Oh, there's a bird. But we're going so fast, we don't really stop and observe what's going on. And we do miss the things of the Lord around us. When he says, be still and know, it's not just a, if all else fails, rest.
Yeah.
He knows that we need rest to clear our hearts and our minds from the clutter. So we're not going so fast.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the birds,
Mhm.
because scripture reminds us, God takes care of the birds. They're not worrying. They're not hustling about. Not long after we moved to this house on the lake, my husband and I were out on the deck one morning, and we could hear turkeys gobbling, mourning doves cooing. We could hear the cardinals chirping. We could hear hummingbirds chattering, and we could
Mhm.
hear the crows doing whatever obnoxious noise it is
Crow
that
thing.
crows do. But we stood there and went, wow. But it took slowing down,
Yeah.
pausing, and even being a bit intentional.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have even noticed that they were there. But
Mhm.
there's such an object lesson for us, because I think we get so busy and we get out of balance because we think everything depends on us. And if we don't even use our Sunday to prepare for the next week, something's not going to happen. So talk a little bit about how we can bring balance in our busy world to find rest.
I think it goes back to like how we've done our trip. I mean, this has been a big trip. We were thankful that we got to do this together. My husband and my husband's with me, and we're doing this travel. But I don't think that we give ourselves buffer. So even in this travel, we've given ourselves buffer. And I think that we have our day timers, the day timers that have from 8:30 to 8:45, from 8:47 to 8, so timed that we have no margin of error. And if you have ever tried to get your children ready for church on a Sunday, you know that if you don't have a margin of error, nobody's going to be happy by the time you get there.
You're right.
And so if there's things that you can do, I think it was Ben Franklin who said, do not put off till tomorrow what you can do today. It wasn't that you would have to be busy, but it's the taking off of the stress of the tomorrow. So even like when our kids were young, I would make a coffee cake the night before, and they knew, okay, we need to get our clothes out for tomorrow. How can you relieve some of the stress by giving yourself a margin of breathing room? And I think in our today's fast-paced world, you've got moms dropping kids off at school, going to work, and then having that frantic fear of like, I can't hit too many red lights, or I'm not going to make it. If I leave now, I'll be only 3 minutes late. We are always in that catch-up mode, and we're just the whole time we're bleeding. We're just bleeding out. And so I think sometimes nobody is going to say, really, I don't need you to bring homemade cupcakes to this event. They're going to. So sometimes we have to stand up and protect our own rest, because that's not something other people are going to do for us. You have to first of all say, I need to rest. I deserve to rest because my body needs it. I'm more effective when I'm rested, and I can serve others when I am more rested. Yeah. And so sometimes when we feel like we have to just pull an all-nighter to get everything on the list done, in a way, that whole time we're just bleeding out. So I think we can give ourselves permission to rest, a reason to rest, and the fact that it's our responsibility to rest. I can't care for people like I need to if I'm struggling to care for myself because I'm not rested. So I think to not feel guilty for resting is important. And I'm not saying you have to just have fill your day with me time, but if you can give yourself a buffer and just sit down. I love the fact that in Ireland, they're always having tea. Always. And it has nothing to do with tea. I drank so much tea, I was sloshing by the time I got back. But it was because as soon as people would come over, they would say, I'll put the kettle on. And they would pour a cup of tea, and you would sit and visit for a cup of tea, like how long it took to sip a hot cup of tea. And I thought, if we did that more, I think our lives would be better. So anyway, just give yourself permission to rest is a big one.
Yeah, you mentioned we need to rest, we deserve to rest, and we're more productive ultimately when we take time to rest. But I want you to touch on that for a second. How can rest boost your productivity if you're actually taking time away from the to-do list?
I can't remember which president it was. It might have been Truman. So I don't know. But there was one of our presidents who he would take a nap every day in the middle of the day. He would hold his car keys in his hand. And then when he would become so relaxed that those car keys would hit the floor, that's when he would wake up. He knew that he needed to rest. And I think it is one of those things that we're so busy. But I think to schedule that, do we sit down to eat at lunch? Do you take that moment before you go to bed? Do you just crash into bed, or you take that time to just 15 minutes, start with just 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Our kids used to know, if you see mom lying on the floor, and I had heard this, and I think it's true, if your feet are elevated, your rest is a little bit more productive because of your blood flow. So a lot of times I would lay flat on the floor, and I would put my feet up on the couch, and I would set the timer for 20 minutes, and they would know. And then of course they wanted to all rest, and then pretty soon they're all laughing and giggling, and I'm just like, oh. So, but turnaround is fair play. Men tried to rest, and his sons were that to him. So, but I just think being purposeful, okay, I'm going to set the timer. I'm just going to feel myself rest. I can feel my heart racing. I can feel my mind racing. I can feel my thoughts just going in and out of my brain so quick that I can't even capture a good train of thought, that might be a good time to just say, I'm setting a timer. Just do it for 15 minutes. Lay flat, put your feet up, and just breathe. If you just don't even listen to anything, just feel yourself resting. Sometimes when I've gone to bed so exhausted in the morning, I will just lay there for a couple of minutes just so I can feel myself resting. And I think it's okay to, if you don't even know what that feels like, then you definitely are put that on your to-do list.
Yeah. And maybe that's the way to start, because so many of us are list driven. What if you actually scheduled time on your to-do list or in your day timer? 15 minutes
Yeah.
to rest.
So if you are somebody who's like that, what I would suggest is have something on your playlist. Have a 15-minute relaxing sound set that you can just lie down with your eyes closed and play that. Play that one thing. That way you're not like, is it time? Is it
Right.
time? Because I think we do that. But just put something gentle on a playlist and just say, when this is over, then I'll get back to it.
That's a good
15
point.
minutes is not going to kill it.
No. Friends, we're going to take a real quick break, but I want you to stick with us, because when we come back, I'm going to ask Marci to share her hope-filled perspective about how to rest effectively and to refill and refuel when your life is busy. We'll be right back.
Mhm.
Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Today, we've been talking about how to rest and refuel effectively, because all of us are living crazy busy lives, but rest is crucial. Marci, before I ask you your hope-filled perspective, which is how I always end the program, I just wondered if you would share real quickly, what were some of the fun cabin experiences you learned while staying with a friend? And how did it change your life when you returned home?
That's a great question. I loved spending time with Ginger. We have known each other for decades, and I loved going with her granddaughters. Her granddaughters are in the book, and it was so fun. We had a book signing, and Lydia and Grace signed my book. And but I would have to say some of the things that I really had learned that was good, first of all, was the rest part, because it was a busy time, but just the chapter about Cliff hammering those nails, having his grandson hammer the nails, and just I think the attentiveness that God has for us, the value that we have to the Lord, became even a little bit more real, as far as, what he does, that his fingerprints are everywhere. So I loved Cliff, when Ginger said, yeah, see that board, it's filled with nails. It was when they were building the deck, and her son had said, hey, Grandpa, can I help build? And of course, here's a crew of men building, and his grandpa didn't say, no, we're too busy, go play with your cousins at the lake. And or you know what, it's my responsibility, it's not your responsibility. Sometimes we feel like we want to save somebody from the work, but really we're excluding them from the joy of helping. And so Cliff went to his tool shed, got a small hammer that fit Andrew's hand, and he just said, hey buddy, I need you to put as many nails in this post as possible. And Andrew stuck at it all day long. At the end of the day, the deck was done, and there was this one post that probably had, like, I don't know, 40 nails in it, and they still have that post. And I love the fact that it's not the project, it's the process. And the Lord does that for us. But part of that is the fact that he does know what's best for us. He does want to include us in what he's doing. And he can't do that if we are so tired and trying to do it all on our own, and trying to minimize how much effort other people have to do instead of including them. We want to take it all on ourselves. So part of resting is sharing the burden, share the load. And that's a valuable lesson that sometimes I think we, in our Western mindset, is like, you know what, if I can do it, I should do it.
Yeah.
And that's actually not true.
So the listener is listening today and they're really struggling with the overwhelm of life. What hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
Well, we talked about the bleeding, we talked about the handbells, and part of the rest is also in the patience. We have to patiently rest. We have to be patient. Peace and patience seem to go hand in hand. And so sometimes we are saying, oh, I just want peace. I just want peace. And I'm busily trying to grab that. But peace and patience in the Bible tend to go hand in hand and be encouraged. That means with courage. So sometimes we are discouraged or because of things that we have put on ourselves. Sometimes we are impatient because of things that we put on ourselves. And then we wonder why there's not peace. And I was talking to somebody about planting, especially going through all these agricultural states, and they're combining and picking and stuff. And my husband had this wonderful garden when our kids were young, and he was pulling up weeds, and he had corn and squash and watermelon and stuff, and he had these rows of carrots. And he looked behind him, and our little child, Amy, at the time, she was actually pulling up they were about this long, pulling up these little matchstick carrots and then shoving them back into the ground. He's like, what are you doing? And she's like, I just wanted to see if they're ready yet. And I think that's what we do with the Lord. We're just like, I just want to see if it's ready. Oh, put it back in. Oh, so we have these short little teeny dangly matchstick carrots because we haven't had the patience. We haven't had the persistence of what it means to rest. Those seeds needs to rest. We need to have patience for that to come to fruition. And so I think sometimes we're pulling up our carrots too soon, and we are not giving ourselves permission to let it set so that we can reap the harvest when it's due. And I just think that that's part of one of those things of being busy. Like I said, nobody's going to say, hey, you know what? How about if we postpone that by 30 minutes so you can prepare? We don't take time to prepare, but that's a big part of resting, what it means to rest.
Friends, I really hope that you were encouraged from this conversation with Marci to take some time to rest and refuel. You need it. You deserve it. It will end up helping you be more productive in the long run. And it's scriptural. In Matthew 11, verses 28 through 29, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. And I would say, and overworked, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, the one who rested in the midst of his ministry. He says, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And if you would like to start the day with a perfect devotional to keep some balance in your life, remind you that God wants you to rest. God gives us rest as a gift. I'm going to encourage you to pick up a copy of Marci's book, Lakeside Retreat. We will have all the information about Marci and all her social media places and her book in the show notes that you can always find at drmichelleb.com. And would you consider sharing this episode with a friend who maybe is feeling the stresses of life, maybe doesn't feel like they can take permission to rest? Share it with them. And consider subscribing to the podcast so you don't miss another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective. Marci, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what you've learned in your journey. And
thank you so much.
From the inside of Lakeside Retreat. I hope someday you'll get to come to our lakeside and get to enjoy sitting on the dock at sunset, which is where I take all my photos from. And blessings on the rest of your trip.
Thank you. Thank you.
Friends, this is another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective. Until next week, may you have a hope-filled, restful week.